Well, we begin with the intersection of money and justice and a plan to bridge that divide.
It is a plan that was hatched here in South Florida that could pave the way for former felons to regain the right to vote, even if they have outstanding court costs. The controversy came after Floridians overwhelmingly 65% voted to restore voting rights to most felons who have completed their sentences. The authors of the amendment said it was self-executing, but state lawmakers decided the word completed sentence included additional financial penalties, court cost fees, as well as restitution.
So someone's ability to pay all of a sudden became a roadblock in getting civil rights restored. A poll tax is what some call that.
Let us introduce our guest this morning to talk about it. That is Desmond Meade. He was the driving force behind Amendment 4, which restores voting rights to former felons who have completed their sentences. Mr. Meade is the executive director of the Florida Rights Restoration Coalition and a graduate of the FIU Law School. Catherine Fernandez Rundle is the state attorney in Miami-Dade County, has been since 1993. She's been reelected 6 times to be the top prosecutor. And Carlos Martinez is public defender for Miami-Dade. He presides over a very large operation, provides free legal services to accused criminals who cannot pay for a private attorney. To all of you,
good morning.
Good morning.
Great to have you here.
Good morning.
Great to have you come in. We will get to Amendment 4 in a minute, but first I want to get you on the record here. We have had horrendous situation in El Paso and Dayton. And Kathy, we've known each other for many years, so I'm going to use the first name here. When you heard about both these shootings, what did you say to yourself? And if you thought that there is some kind of remedy, something that can be done, what is it?
You know, it is just heartbreaking to every now and again, and it seems like it's almost every day in America, wake up to a grieving community and see the faces of families who have lost someone to senseless gun violence.
Right. Last weekend it was Gilroy, California.
That's right. I think the Garlic Food Festival or something of that nature. And so I think one thing is we all have to look at ourselves as a country and say, when are we finally going to stand up and do something very strong, very meaningful to stop this violence that's going on in our country? And one last thing I'd like to say, because I can see you shifting to go to someone else to ask them that. I think that when we talk about universal background checks, it would be so simple if we could institute nationally a multidisciplinary review. What does someone's mental health records look like? I mean, there might be some HIPAA issues, but we're going to have to talk about that. There have been Baker Acts. Do we know about that? Do they have domestic violence stay-away orders? We don't know enough about the people to whom we are giving weapons, never mind assault weapons.
You know, the FBI has been tracking mass murder since 2000. And then in 2017 to now, the numbers have ramped up significantly. Carlos Martinez, to Kathy's point, the person, the mental condition of a person, weapons, and then there's the element of hate. And we know, at least in the El Paso case, it appears just like in Gilroy and in the synagogue shooting in Philadelphia, hate is an issue.
Well, we can't continue to deny that words don't matter, because words do matter. And what is happening at the national level, what this president has done, the language that he uses against Hispanics, against Muslims, against other people, that is a problem. And for us to continue to deny and then start talking about, oh, we need to look at, how much are we going to put in here to prevent this kind of stuff. The first step of prevention is stop inciting hate. Stop inciting the hate.
We talk so much about teaching girls, raising girls, of so much focus on bringing girls into an equality position. What are we raising boys, Desmond? Should we be looking at boys and how they're raised? Because these shooters are all young men.
Wow. I never really looked at that before, but I really thought that it's probably even a deeper issue. And coincidentally, it does relate to Amendment 4. All right. Amendment 4 came about because politicians lacked the political willpower, lacked the courage to make the correct changes, to make the changes that they knew or that the public has been crying for them to make for over 100 years. And the same thing here with gun violence and gun control. You know, it's clear that the public overwhelmingly support some type of sensible gun control, but yet politicians do not have the courage to do so. What Amendment 4 did was that the people took matters into their own hands. And it appears that if we're going to resolve this, we cannot continue to rely on politicians, but we need to rely on our fellow citizens to stand up in unison against this.
Yeah, but Kathy, to Desmond's point, Amendment 4 laid this out. Nearly 65% of Floridians said, yes, let's be fair. People who have committed a crime, served their sentence, made restitution, aside from murderers, sex offenders, should have their voting rights restored. And the authors of this, including Mr. Meade, said it was self-executing, but then the legislature said, no, we have to interpret this. Now, what you have proposed is a way to sort of still make it possible for several 100,000, maybe more than 1 million people in Florida to find a way to register to vote.
We believe we have, and first of all, I have to give hats off to this man. He's just incredibly inspiring and full of energy. To go around the state of Florida and get 5 million people to vote on that initiative is quite incredible. And yes, so even if there are those who say it was self-enacting, of which I was of that opinion as well, it doesn't matter because the state legislature passed a law that went into effect this July and said this is how you're going to implement the will of that constitutional amendment. And so myself and others like Carlos, we're constitutional officers first. And I'm the chief law enforcement officer for the community. So my faithfulness is to the constitutional amendment, and the Constitution is the highest law of the land, and to the law that was passed by our legislature that became effective in July. And that's what we believe this plan does. It honors both. We can accomplish what we think it was intended by everyone without having to create anything that's too overbearing for those returning citizens that want to register to vote.
So Amendment 4, the wording of it says most felons, but for sex criminals and murderers, can get their voting rights back when they complete their sentences. And what state lawmakers did was interpret complete to mean prison time, probation, community service, whatever the sentence was, restitution, and then there's the financial components. What of court fees and fines? What is the difference between a sentence portion and the court fees and fines portion? And why aren't those considered in this new plan part of the actual sentence?
The way a sentence is composed is based on what the judge orders at the time of sentencing. So if there are some terms like probation, community control, prison, or jail time, those will be in the sentence. If the judge wants to put financial obligations in it, the judge has the authority to put fines in it. The judge also has the authority on probation and community control to include restitution and some other things that are going to be paid as a condition of that sentence, that probation sentence. So this is not anything other than that. We are actually taking the exact plain language of the statute, going through it, looking at the sentence document, looking at what the sentence was, and was that sentence completed?
So you would have to go to court. This is not something that you're doing in either of your offices. Desmond Meade, you have to, in this plan, former felon would have to go to court and redo that sentence.
Well, yes, to modify, right? But I want to be real clear with this, that when we launched the Citizens Initiative, we understood that there were going to be some financial obligations as it relates to completion of sentence. As Mr. Martinez noted, that there are statutes that if you're convicted of violating carries a penalty, a financial penalty. And so for us to say that we've completed our sentence, we would have to actually complete that obligation that's attached to the statute that we're violating. And as it relates to restitution, the campaign was very clear that to an individual, especially as a person who has caused harm in the community, and that our number one purpose is to repair that harm and to help create safer communities. And what we're saying is that if we're asking you to make us whole, then we have to have a genuine intent to make you whole as well. And so we already took that position prior to this legislation. And we have to understand that there is a fundamental difference between executing or self-execution and accompanying, right, legislation. Right, in medical marijuana or fair districts, the legislature had to do something to execute it. They didn't have to do anything to execute it.
Well, it was a political decision.
Yes,
now
it
you're
was.
trying to find a legal, but if I may say, a kind of political response to
Yes.
make it work. All right, everybody hold your thoughts for a minute. We'll come back, talk more about the Amendment 4 changes that are proposed after a break.
We are back discussing Miami-Dade's new plan to somehow get former felons who owe court costs and fees to go ahead and be able to register to vote under the new constitutional amendment. Desmond Meade, when we left off last segment, you sort of touched on the restitution portion, which is a financial portion of a sentence. And right now, the ACLU, the NAACP, a couple of other civil rights groups have a court filing for an injunction to stop Florida's law implementing Amendment 4 from going into effect because of all the things we're talking about, the cost, the penalties, the right to vote now has a cost attached. But in that lawsuit, it's also fighting the restitution portion. In other words, this lawsuit would like former felons to be free of having to pay restitution as well to get their rights back. But you don't agree with that, do you?
Well, first of all, I don't really agree with the injunction. I think that would be more harmful to the community. It would create more confusion, and it would actually create a more chilling impact on our ability to register returning citizens. The legislation that they're filing and trying to get an injunction on is actually legislation that, when we talk about it, has some real gems in it that allows us to do more to get more people registered to vote than we would have been able to were there no legislation. Now, we're not saying the legislation is perfect, but what we does say is that it has provisions to where courts are now able to modify sentences. They have provisions that what they call tie goes to the runner, to where any dispute or ambiguity rules in favor of the person trying to register to vote. And then, of course, we have the four corners of the sentencing document, like here in Dade County, where it would turn out that the majority of the people would not even have to worry about these financial barriers to being able to vote. We're about the people first. Like Michael was talking about the political response, our response is totally along the lines of the people that are closest to the pain, people like me.
That's the first time I've ever heard anybody interpret that law that
People
way. It's
closest
really
to the
interesting.
pain.
Yeah.
I like that. And we should point out, if anybody doesn't know it, in Miami-Dade County, there are, 150,000 former felons who might be able to vote if this plan
And I'm one of them.
through.
And I'm one of them. Because I received my felonies right here in Dade County. And so this impacts me. I'm now registered to vote, but if for some obscure reason the state has happened to see an obscure fine that maybe I didn't find or whatever, and guess what? We have provisions now within this legislation that would allow me to petition the court and have have my sentence modified. So those fines, now it's I want to be clear with this, it's not absolving me. This legislation and what we're doing in Miami does not absolve me of my responsibility to pay whatever financial obligations I have as a result of my conviction. What it does is what Amendment 4 intended to do. And that was to clear a pathway for people like me, right, who served our time to be able to register to vote and participate in democracy.
Kathy, has the Attorney General, Ashley Moody, weighed in on this plan?
No, I had a brief conversation with her, nothing formal that I could represent on her behalf for sure, and asked her, advised her that we were working through a local plan and trying to, could we get any guidance? And this was maybe, 6 weeks ago or so, and she was very smart, and she said, I don't think I should be involved because this is going to be in litigation. Mm-hmm. So from that perspective, she was correct.
She was right.
To take right. She was
So
right.
there's one major thing that I think we need to get clear for everybody, which is everyone keeps confusing costs, fees, and fines, and they're using those terms interchangeably.
Yes.
They are not interchangeable in the law.
Define them for us, Carlos.
In the law, a fine is what the legislature has said as a punishment. You know, you violated this law, the judge finds you guilty, adjudicates you guilty, and they sentence you to this much time, and the fine is, for example, $5,000. That's a fine. That's a penalty that goes with that case. A fee, there are only two fees that we've been able to identify in Florida law. One is the clerk payment plan fee, and the other one is the public defender application fee. Those two total $75. So when I hear all these tremendous numbers of millions and billions of dollars that people owe, that is not restitution, that information is downright wrong.
And it's not addressed in the legislation. The legislation does not say anything about court costs.
It does not require
Nothing.
court costs.
As a matter of fact, they intentionally removed that. The initial legislation that was filed did contain court costs.
Yeah.
But after we talked with the legislator, with the writers of the legislation, they removed the court cost provision out of the legislation.
So don't the court costs pay for court? But where
They
does
do.
that?
Traditionally, what has happened over the years is the legislature has transferred a lot of the costs to the defendants. You're using our system, you have to pay for a large part of it. And so there are a number of different statutory costs that attach. So there's a public defender cost, a clerk, a court, a prosecutor, Victims Compensation Act. There's like 8 things that you are supposed to pay a cost. Now, the point that I think we're trying to make is that stays intact.
Yeah.
That is the best way to describe it is as a monetary judgment, that it remains enforceable. We do not consider that part of the sentence. If you read
That's right.
the strong letter of the law, the legislature said the sentence.
And it's not punitive in nature as well. So we consider those more like administrative costs than anything. So when we talked about completion of the sentence, we're talking about the punitive portions.
Punitive
Yeah.
What was you ordered to do as a result of your conviction?
So-
right,
so-
not as a result of doing business in the court.
Very
but as a
quickly,
result of your
because
conviction.
we have to take a break, but is this in effect now?
Right.
Yes.
Right now?
It is in effect. We're going to be all on our websites. He has a hotline number. You want to give it to
Yes,
him real quick?
1-877-MY-VOTE-0. 1-877-MY-VOTE-0. Anyone, any part of the state can call that number, and they're going to get help within 24 hours.
And within shortly, this week, hopefully, both Carlos and I will have websites there, have all the directions, frequently asked questions,
Good.
motions, and where to go and who to
We
call.
and Local 10 News will post that on
Yeah.
our website, local10.com.
Yeah.
And by the way, more power to Harvey Rubin, Miami-Dade County Clerk,
Yes.
and also Senator Jason
Jason
Pizzo
Pizzo.
has
Yeah.
been very
Absolutely.
involved
And you
in
know,
this
I'm
as well.
glad you mentioned that. The courts have been this is all about collaboration. We're the only 3 people here today.
It's an easy
Lord
deal.
knows we tried to
And
get
this-
everyone
I'm
here.
sure.
It was
okay.
an easy call, trust me. It was very easy because anyone, and one of the things I'm appreciative of Senator Pizzo, Representative McGee, and even Senator Brandis
Jeff Brandis.
and Representative Jamie Grant of writing this in such a way that is so plain that anybody could understand it.
It
You know,
worked.
yeah,
That's
it worked.
worked.
Let
We'll
it
see.
work.
It
All right,
worked.
thank
Thanks
you
so
all.
much.
We
Great
are
to
so
have you.
glad. Thank